Can a million chickens carry the weight of a nation's sovereignty? That is the question Captain Ibrahim Traoré has forced the world to confront after unleashing an army of birds across Burkina Faso. To outsiders, the idea sounded like a joke. Chickens as national policy, chickens as pest control, chickens as the face of independence. But to Burkina Faso farmers watching locusts devour their maize, or to mothers in villages counting the cost of imported pesticides, it felt like something else entirely. It felt like hope. Because hidden beneath the feathers is a philosophy. Africa must feed itself, fight for itself, and free itself. Traoré's chickens are not just chasing caterpillars through the fields. They are chasing away decades of dependency, showing that survival does not need to come packaged in foreign aid. This is not just about poultry or pests. It is about whether an African country can break cycles of hunger and control with its own imagination, turning even the humblest of creatures into symbols of power. And yet, the question lingers, is this bold experiment enough to solve the deeper problems that plague Burkina Faso, or is it only the beginning of a much larger battle? Let's find out. Across the Sahel, farmers know the sound of destruction before they see it. It is the low hum of wings, the sudden darkening of the sky, and the carpet of locusts settling across their fields. In a matter of hours, months of labor vanish. In recent years, another invader has joined this storm. The fall armyworm, a relentless caterpillar capable of wiping out maize harvests in entire regions. Burkina Faso, where most families live by the rhythm of the land, has been struck again and again by these enemies. For decades, the solutions came from abroad. This is where Ibrahim Traoré's idea turns the story on its head. Instead of chemicals, he released 1 million chickens into the countryside. To the skeptical eye, it looked absurd. Birds against swarms. Yet for the farmer who has watched chickens scratch the earth for insects since childhood, it made perfect sense. Chickens are nature's pesticide. They hunt caterpillars, grasshoppers, and locusts with tireless precision. Unlike chemicals, they do not vanish after spraying. They multiply, lay eggs, and feed the household. Where pesticides leave emptiness, chickens leave fertility. Their droppings enrich the soil, creating healthier crops the following season. In this way, chickens are not just birds, they are soldiers. Each one is a foot soldier in the war against pests, turning what is destructive into what is nourishing. Locusts become protein, caterpillars become eggs, swarms become survival. It is a cycle of life that reflects Africa's oldest wisdom. Do not waste what the land provides, even if it comes first as a threat. But this is not just about ecology. It is also about psychology. By sending chickens into the fields, Traoré sent a message to his people. We do not need to beg for outside help to fight our battles. In a time when Burkina Faso faces sanctions, coups, and climate shocks, this matters deeply. It restores confidence that solutions can be African, that survival does not have to come with foreign conditions attached. Yet even this brilliance raises questions. Chickens may eat pests, but pests are not the only enemy Burkina Faso faces. Fields are threatened not just by locusts, but by drought, by desertification, and by the grinding poverty that forces many young people to leave villages behind altogether. 1 million chickens may protect crops today, but will they secure the nation's food tomorrow? And so the problem stands before us. How can Burkina Faso transform this clever ecological tactic into a long-term path toward true food sovereignty, breaking free from the cycle of dependency once and for all? Because in Africa, hunger has never been just a biological problem. It has always been a political one. And Burkina Faso's release of 1 million chickens was not only about killing caterpillars or chasing locusts. It was a declaration that survival must no longer come on foreign terms. For too long, Africa has been trapped in what might be called the economy of dependency. Every time a crisis strikes, the continent is reminded of its supposed weakness and offered foreign solutions at a cost. In the case of agriculture, that cost came in the form of imported pesticides, patented seeds, and loans packaged as assistance. Burkina Faso's farmers knew this cycle well. Wait for the NGOs to arrive, depend on the subsidies, and accept that feeding oneself is tied to the generosity or manipulation of others. But sovereignty means the right to feed yourself without permission. By releasing chickens, Traoré turned a humble bird into a symbol of defiance against this cycle. Chickens do not arrive in aid containers stamped with logos from foreign donors. They do not require loans from international banks. They reproduce, they sustain, and they multiply within the community. In this sense, they embody the principle of food sovereignty, the right of people to define their own agricultural systems and ensure that their survival is in their own hands. And the beauty of this model is in its layers. First, chickens provide immediate food, meat for protein, and eggs for daily nutrition. In a region where malnutrition is still a silent killer, this is no small contribution. Second, they fertilize the soil, improving crop yields without chemical imports. Third, they reduce the demand for expensive pesticides, keeping money in local pockets instead of sending it abroad. Each layer reduces dependence and strengthens resilience. Think of it this way. Every egg laid by these chickens is not just food on a plate, it is a small act of independence. Every clutch of chicks born in a village is another generation of self-sufficiency. And every farmer who sees pests eaten by birds instead of waiting for chemicals experiences a subtle shift in psychology from dependency to dignity. Yet food sovereignty is never only about food, it is about power. Whoever controls the food supply controls the future of a nation. Colonial powers once understood this, which is why they reorganized African economies to serve European markets rather than local needs. Today, multinational corporations understand this, which is why they push African governments into contracts for seeds, chemicals, and fertilizers that cannot be locally produced. By leaning on chickens, Traoré is reminding Burkina Faso and Africa that the battle for sovereignty begins with the ability to feed one's own children without asking for permission. But here is where the tension deepens. Food sovereignty through chickens may work as a principle, but can it withstand the scale of Burkina Faso's challenges? 1 million chickens can scatter across villages, but what about droughts that last for years? What about the structural inequalities of global trade, where African farmers cannot compete against subsidized imports from Europe? What about the fact that hunger is not only about pests, but also about poverty, infrastructure, and distribution? This leads us to the next problem: empowering households and communities so that food sovereignty is not just a national slogan, but a lived reality at the grassroots level. Because sovereignty declared in the capital means little if families in the countryside cannot turn it into food on their plates. Let's pause for a second to say, big thank you to the Black Culture Diary community, where Black voices, stories, and legacies are preserved and amplified. By becoming a member, you're not just supporting the channel, you're becoming part of a powerful cultural movement. Let's continue. Food sovereignty at the national level can sound abstract, a grand slogan declared from the capital. But its real test lies in the village, in the household, in the kitchen. When Captain Ibrahim Traoré ordered the release of 1 million chickens, he was not only fighting pests in the fields, he was scattering seeds of opportunity into homes, schools, and marketplaces across Burkina Faso. Consider the simplest example: a family that catches a handful of these chickens as they wander into their compound. What begins as a curious spectacle quickly becomes an economic asset. Those birds can be raised, bred, and traded. Their eggs can feed children, while surplus eggs can be sold in local markets. Their manure can fertilize the family's small garden, making vegetables healthier and more abundant. In this way, one bird multiplies into food, income, and fertility. Multiply that by 1 million, and you have not just pest control, but a quiet revolution in village economies. In Africa, small is never insignificant. Entire livelihoods are built from what looks humble to outsiders. Chickens are among the easiest animals to rear, requiring little capital and minimal infrastructure. For women in particular, who dominate informal markets and household-level farming, poultry becomes a tool of independence. A woman who controls a few hens can control her own income stream, however modest. She can send her children to school with egg money, trade for grain, or contribute to community savings groups. This is why the ripple effects of the chicken release go beyond fields. They touch gender dynamics, empowering women in ways that large foreign-funded projects often fail to do. Where aid programs create dependency, chickens create autonomy. Where chemicals enrich corporations, chickens enrich families. Where Western models impose complexity, chickens offer simplicity, and simplicity is powerful when it can be scaled across an entire nation. Markets too feel the effect. As poultry populations increase, local trade networks strengthen. Eggs and chicken meat become more affordable, reaching households that once struggled to buy protein. Farmers who once depended solely on crops gain a second stream of income from poultry, reducing their vulnerability to bad harvests. Local poultry farms can even expand from this foundation, supplying restaurants, schools, and urban centers. In short, chickens become micro-businesses that feed into macro-economies. But the power of this strategy lies also in its symbolism. For decades, African economies were told that development required billion-dollar loans, complex technologies, or imported expertise. Yet here is a strategy that relies on none of those. It uses what Africa already has: birds, families, markets, and the ingenuity of local communities. It is development without dependency, dignity without debt. And still, the question remains, is grassroots empowerment enough to meet the storm? Burkina Faso is not only fighting pests and poverty, it is also fighting insecurity, sanctions, and the creeping threat of climate change. Chickens can multiply and feed households, but can they defend against drought, insurgency, or the pressures of global trade? Thus, we reach the next tension. How can Burkina Faso turn these grassroots successes into a broader shield of resilience, protecting the nation not just against hunger, but against the wider political and ecological storms that threaten its survival? Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now. Every nation faces storms, but some storms are heavier than others. For Burkina Faso, the storms are political, ecological, and economic all at once. It is a landlocked country caught in the crosswinds of insurgency, climate change, and sanctions from foreign powers. Its people know what it means to live on the edge of survival, where every season is uncertain and every harvest can be the difference between dignity and dependence. In such a landscape, leadership is measured not by polished speeches, but by the ability to improvise, to resist, and to endure. This is the lens through which we must view Ibrahim Traoré's release of 1 million chickens. It was never only about insects or eggs. It was about resilience, a refusal to surrender to crises by waiting for outside solutions. Look first at the ecological storm. Climate change is reshaping the Sahel. Rains are shorter and more unpredictable. Desertification creeps southward, swallowing fertile land and leaving dust behind. Locusts and fall armyworms, fueled by changing weather patterns, attack crops with new ferocity. Western answers have long been chemical, pesticides flown in during emergencies, fertilizers imported to squeeze yields from exhausted soils. But these solutions often create as many problems as they solve. They erode long-term fertility, poison water sources, and chain farmers to external suppliers. Traoré's chickens are an ecological counter-strategy, a renewable, regenerative system that integrates with the land rather than depleting it. Now look at the political storm. Since seizing power in 2022, Traoré has positioned himself as the face of a new Sahelian independence. He expelled French troops, strengthened ties with Mali and Niger, and challenged the dominance of Western institutions. But this defiance comes with costs. Burkina Faso faces sanctions, reduced aid, and strained diplomatic relations with the very powers that once financed its budget. In this context, the chicken release is a political statement that even under pressure, Burkina Faso will not bow. Instead of waiting for aid drops or loans tied to conditions, it will innovate from within. Finally, consider the economic storm. Burkina Faso's economy leans heavily on gold exports, making it vulnerable to global price swings. Rural households remain dependent on subsistence farming, with little margin for error. A poor harvest can push families into hunger, migration, or dependence on aid. By introducing chickens as both pest control and food source, Traoré diversified resilience at the grassroots level. If the crops fail, there are still eggs and poultry. If pests attack, chickens fight back. If fertilizers are too costly, manure takes their place. It is not a perfect shield, but it is a shield nonetheless. The deeper lesson here is that resilience does not always come from grand projects. It can come from simple, replicable solutions scaled across an entire nation. A chicken scratching in the dirt may not look like sovereignty, but multiplied by 1 million, it becomes a force against pests, against hunger, against dependency. And yet, resilience built on symbolism must eventually prove itself in substance. The chickens can fight locusts, but can they fight the insecurity tearing villages apart? They can feed families, but can they replace the billions in aid and investment that Burkina Faso risks losing through its defiance of the West? They can fertilize fields, but can they halt the march of climate change across the Sahel? This leads us to the final question. Can chickens, as symbols of sovereignty, transform into the foundation of a long-term African model of independence? Or will they remain a temporary gesture remembered more for its boldness than its results? History often remembers nations not by the policies they drafted, but by the symbols that captured their struggles. In America, it was the Boston Tea Party, not just a protest over taxes, but a symbol of defiance. In India, it was Gandhi's Salt March, not only about salt, but about sovereignty. For Burkina Faso one day, it may well be chickens, not for their feathers or eggs, but for what they represented. The audacity to carve out independence with one's own hands, using what was available, rather than what was imposed. At first glance, releasing 1 million chickens looks like a rural development plan. But peel back the layers, and it is philosophy turned into policy. It says that survival does not need to be outsourced, that even the humblest resources can become weapons of sovereignty. It defies the Western narrative that solutions must be imported, financed, or patented. Instead, it asserts that African nations can draw strength from their own soil, their own traditions, their own creativity. This is why the chickens matter beyond pest control. They speak to a people weary of dependency. For decades, Africa has been told that progress must come through aid packages, structural adjustment programs, or the guidance of foreign experts. Each time, the promise was that dependency would be temporary, but each time, the cycle returned. Chickens break this pattern not because they are extraordinary, but because they are ordinary. They are available, affordable, and African. Turning them into a national strategy is to say, we do not need miracles to survive. We only need to trust ourselves. The symbolism also resonates with dignity. When farmers see chickens clearing pests, they do not see handouts, they see self-sufficiency. When mothers trade eggs in the market, they do not feel like aid recipients, they feel like contributors. This dignity is priceless in a world that too often portrays Africa as helpless. Traoré's chickens flip that narrative on its head. They show that Africans can laugh at the absurdity of their struggles while turning that absurdity into brilliance. Of course, symbols are only powerful if they lead somewhere. Burkina Faso's chickens cannot carry the entire burden of its economy, its security, or its climate challenges. But they can carry something just as valuable: confidence. Confidence that solutions do not have to arrive in cargo planes. Confidence that sovereignty is not only declared in speeches but also practiced in the fields. Confidence that even a small bird can be a message of independence when released in numbers large enough to shake the imagination. And this is where the story opens beyond Burkina Faso. Africa, from Senegal to Ethiopia, is filled with nations fighting the same battles, against pests, against hunger, against dependency. If 1 million chickens can change the psychology of survival in one country, what might happen if other nations dared to innovate with the same courage? What if Africa stopped waiting for blueprints from outside and began scaling its own everyday genius into national strategies? The world may laugh at chickens today, but history has a way of turning ridicule into reverence. What is mocked as naive in one decade is often celebrated as visionary in the next. The question then is not whether Burkina Faso's chickens can solve all its problems. The real question is, will this humble symbol of independence inspire a continental shift, where Africa finally trusts its own creativity to carry it through the storms of the future? Let us know in the comment section. Is Africa headed toward change? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If so, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: the Black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious Blacks have been. Thanks for watching, And until the next video, stay tuned.